Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. The show, as many of you know, brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. We're going to cover a burning issue once again today, and as I'm joined every week by my co-host Richard Eveling. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to be here with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, okay, Richard. So we covered immigration last week, and obviously it is still the burning issue of our day here, especially in the run-up to the midterm elections. President Trump is seizing on this as much as he can to galvanize support for Republican candidates. Excuse me, I've got an allergy attack today. And what he's doing is he announced the mobilization of 5,200 troops to send down to the border to protect America from this so-called invasion of a few thousand refugees from Central America who are fleeing the violence and the extreme poverty in their countries and hoping to come to the United States pursuant to the law. I mean, that's what's really interesting about this, is that these people are planning on complying with U.S. law, which is dealing with refugee status, rather than trying to sneak across the border illegally. But Trump feels like he's got to send the troops down there. And then the latest thing in this whole charade is that he's planning on signing an executive order that nullifies the constitutional provision on birthright citizenship. And that's the provision that was enacted as part of the 14th Amendment that said that anybody that's born here in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is automatically an American citizen. So Trump's under the impression that he can amend the Constitution with an executive order. So here we are, Richard. I mean, let me put things in a larger perspective. I grew up on the Texas-Mexican border, and I have seen this crisis ongoing for my entire life. I mean, more than 60 years you've had this crisis. I mean, it's almost comical in a way if it weren't so tragic in terms of the death and suffering that this whole thing produces. But I mean, I've seen it continuously. It's never gone away, this crisis. And ever so often it goes below the radar screen and people sort of calm down and they go about their lives. And then all of a sudden some president or some politician just stirs the pot again and talks about how the immigrants, the illegals, are coming to invade America, and then there's this whole segment of people that get all riled up. It happened in the 50s, the 60s. A lot of those people that got riled up are now dead, but the cycle just repeats itself continuously. So now we're in one of those periodic paroxysms where, man, Trump's got his supporters all riled up, and man, they're getting loaded for bear, and a lot of them are scared. I mean, they're scared that the illegals are going to come and take them out of their homes and I don't do whatever. I mean, it seems to me they're more scared of this caravan than they are of the Muslims and Saddam Hussein and the communists during the Cold War. I mean, it's really fascinating. You've got the most powerful government in history and the scaredest people in history. And I don't think that's a coincidence. But what we finally have to recognize, Richard, is that this ongoing crisis is a direct result of their system of immigration controls. And that's what they don't seem to get, that there is no solution that they can come up with, no plan, because inevitably their plan and solution involves the continuation of the cause of the problem. So I've been pointing out for at least 28, 29 years here at FFF, there's only one real solution to this socialist caused crisis, and immigration controls are a form of socialist central planning. That solution is the free market. It is the simplest solution. The free movements of people across borders, the same way we have domestically here. That doesn't mean that anybody has to become a citizen. It just means free movements. And people say, oh, you don't believe in borders. Yeah, I believe in borders. I just believe in the right of people to cross borders, to seek a better way of life, to pursue happiness, which Jefferson tells us is a fundamental right that adheres to every person. But free markets bring harmony. They bring a sense of morality. They bring a sense of justice. And we're talking about economic liberty, liberty of contract, the right to pursue happiness. This is the only solution, Richard. And in the meantime, people just continue decade after decade beating their head up against the wall, and they don't realize that the wall is this system of immigration controls that they have.
Well, I understand that this is a problem. I recall when you were moving FFF from Denver, Colorado to Northern, and how and people heard that there was a caravan of one, Jacob Hornberger driving his car east, and he was going to invade and cross the border of Virginia, and you were a cultural threat. Here you had all this peaceful and calm and happy community of bureaucrats and state bloodsuckers, and here was this invader from another state who was going to take up residence and challenge their premises. Well, clearly they needed to put soldiers on the border to have kept you out, because it's been all downhill since. But the fact is that you know, all I can do is reiterate some of the things you said and perhaps elaborate on them. If you believe in liberty, that is the right of an individual to peacefully live his life as he chooses, to try to improve his life, to follow some goals that seem to give value and meaning to his life, to share it with others in both the family setting as well as through free association with others who may share values, beliefs, and goals similar to his own, or through the free exchange of business, for mutual material and cultural enhancement. If you believe in these, then I don't see how you cannot at least seriously reflect upon the idea that a logical extension of those ideas is that an individual has the right to peacefully and honestly move about and live, work, retire, visit any place that he chooses to, and then acts in these honest and peaceful ways with those who are his new interlocutors to where he is, either temporarily or permanently. The same way as you reiterate the freedom to move between the state of Washington to Florida, or from the state of Maine to New Mexico, or from California to North Carolina, or. There are state borders, and within the United States, so there's the overarching legal framework of the U.S. Constitution. Each state has many of its own rules and laws that vary from each other, or the content of how the law is defined or enforced have variations between the states. There's state sovereignty in that sense in the overarching federal system of the U.S. government. Yet we do not think that, well, you know, the people from one state are going to come into another, and they're going to take our jobs, and they're going to threaten our values, and they're going to undermine this and that. We just take it for granted that people have these rights of freedom to move, and that if people should come with different goals, purposes, or values, all as long as they're peaceful and honest, that the path then is to then reason with them, interact with them, share your views with them. You're sneezing and I'm coughing. Together we make a great pair. And that this is how the collaborative system of society works. Just think, if you just live within the same state, you change jobs and you move from one city or town to another, and you move into a new community with different neighbors. And maybe some of those neighbors hold different values or views than your own, or the person coming in seems to be different than your values, beliefs, and attitudes. Well, do you shun them? Do you try to kick them out? No. You have a new neighbor who's peacefully bought a home near or next to yours, and you find out if you have mutual interest, or if you have differences, you invite them over for dinner or a cup of coffee, and you try to talk about things and see where there are common grounds and where they're not, because you're living together in the same area, maybe next door to each other. And that's what people do. That is the ethical and liberty-based way of doing this. So this idea that a line arbitrarily drawn on a map due to political actions of governments in the past somehow create different worlds, alien universes, is absurd. The fact is that there's a large community in the United States already of Latin American background and heritage. Many of them have been here for generations, or As you pointed out in our last discussion, their ancestors were here at the time the United States annexed about a third of Mexico during the Mexican War. So they weren't coming in, they were there already. And they were made part of the United States and then added to the American culture. And we take this for granted. Food, customs, holidays, traditions, all become meshed together into that common melting pot that is often poo-pooed as a cliche, but in fact is the essence of the United States. Now, these people coming now have made this sort of glaring impression because they're in a caravan and they're walking, miles by feet. How is this any different than the millions who came in the 19th century and into the 20th century by boat instead, mostly from Europe, but also some from Asia, even with the first immigration restrictions on racist lines against the Chinese and the Japanese, but from all over the world, in large numbers, influencing the culture, the character of communities, competing for jobs, but also investing, giving their skills, their knowledge, their know-how, intensifying the division of labor with specializations that had not been available before or not to the same degree to take advantage of. Well, that is what we are as America. We are the happy and lucky and successful product of waves of immigrants from many cultures, many societies, many backgrounds, many faiths, and many ethnicities. And if you take the broad picture of our country as a whole for 250 years, almost 50 years, we are stronger for it. Now we can use these cliche terms that the left uses to have their mantras, inclusion and diversity, but take their ideological gobbledygook out of it and just think of the word alone, diversity. Many differences of points of views or attitudes or belief systems or ways of doing things, and inclusion, bringing them together peacefully in the market and in peaceful association, coordinating and integrating them, something better and improved than what had been when they were separate or not interacting with each other. That is the American history. Now these waves are coming, just as the waves of Poles came, Germans came, Italians came, Swedes came, English came, Russians came, Ukrainians came, Lithuanians came, Asians came, et cetera, et cetera. And
don't forget the Irish.
Oh, no, not well. See, I wanted to exclude that. Now you're talking. There's always the exception to the rule. And waves of people from Latin America over the last 150 years since this annexation of about a third of Mexico. That's just a fact, and we are stronger for it. This is just another instance of the short-sightedness, and to be honest, the emotional narrow-mindedness of some people to look beyond and just look at it with a wider perspective of their own personal ancestry and heritage. Where would you today be if the American continent, the American country, had not been open to waves of virtually, for a long time, virtually free, open borders, and your ancestors could come here? Where would you be if that had not happened? Would you even been born? Would you be living a less happy society if you had been born but were constrained in some old country because your grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents had not been able to immigrate here and try a new life, which in the United States? We're all the beneficiaries of this. It is a narrow-minded and short-sighted view, somehow the difference when it's just example of what historically has made America great.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Well, one of the fascinating parts about all this is the power of propaganda. I mean, that it really goes to show you that the President of the United States really has a tremendous ability to influence the mindset of people and get them all stirred up through propaganda. I mean, this is what regimes have done throughout history. They use propaganda to get people all riled up about things. And so you've got a phenomenon where lots of these Trumpsters have imagined dark scenarios. A favorite one is, well, Jacob, what if the whole world moves to America? I mean, we don't have enough room for the whole world. And so, what I respond always, I say, look, there's no question freedom is dangerous. Freedom is very scary. I mean, is it possible that the whole world could move here with open borders? Absolutely. Can't deny it. I mean, by the same token, if we legalize drugs, which we libertarians want to do, we want to end this another failed war, the war on drugs. You can't deny that it's possible that tomorrow every single person in the United States, including commercial airline pilots and surgeons, could be on heroin and cocaine. You can't deny that's a possibility. So yes, freedom is scary because you don't know what the results are going to be. But if we look at it logically, Richard, I mean, look, theoretically it's possible that everyone in the United States today could decide to move to New York City. You can't deny that that's a possibility. So maybe we need to delegate to President Trump the power to control movements of people into New York City. Well, is it theoretically possible that the whole world could move here? Yes. But how logical is that? I mean, the market regulates these things. How come everybody doesn't move to San Francisco? That's a pretty attractive place. Well, because San Francisco is a very expensive place to live. And so people start having to accommodate and make choices based on financial consequences here. Now, when the waves of immigrants were coming in the 19th century, as you pointed out, they discovered that it's not easy to move to a new country. It takes a rare kind of person that's willing to uproot, leave family, leave culture, leave language, leave friends, leave security, financial security with jobs and so forth, and come to a place where you get insulted, abused, mistreated, where you have to learn the language, where you have to get a job. I mean, it's not an easy way of life. And in fact, I read once where it was estimated that like 25% of the immigrants who came to the United States in the 19th century returned to their home countries because it was just too difficult. And, you know, believe it or not, a lot of people, most people in the world like where they live. They like the culture, they like the language, they like their neighborhoods, they like their friends. It's the rare one that says, I'm getting out of here and I'm going to go better my life. And those are the people that they're like a gift to a society. We should be thanking them for coming over here because they're the hard workers. They're the ones that bring vitality. They bring entrepreneurship. They bring a hard work ethic. They're a great gift. I mean, they're one of the reasons why Americans in the 19th century had an enormous increase in the standard of living. And another example of this phenomenon was Argentina, because Argentina in the late 1800s or late 1900s copied the United States system of open borders and open immigration, low taxes, low regulations, and they started to skyrocket until Perón came in and started adopting many of the same socialist policies that Franklin Roosevelt was adopting. So, you know, everything argues in favor of freedom and free markets. You don't have to have these dark scenarios that you just open to the borders to the free movements of people. You have tourists coming in, you have people coming in to invest, to open up businesses. Nobody cares who's a citizen and who isn't with a regime of open borders. You don't go and say, well, I'm not sure I'm going to do business in this Walmart because you might have foreign citizens working here, or in this bank you might have some Swiss people here working in your bank. It's ridiculous. Nobody does that. The only reason that this mindset is concentrated on this crisis is because of the power of propaganda. And so you have this failed system that's failed over decades, at least 6 decades. Total chaos, what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. And people can't break out of that box, Richard, and see that if you had freedom and free markets, open borders, there wouldn't be any crisis at all.
Yeah, concerning values and attitude, a couple of times past when we've talked on this theme, I've sort of made a joke about it. But the fact is, my wife and I have been living down in South Carolina now for about 4.5 years, since I accepted that job where I teach at the Citadel in Charleston. And traditionally, South Carolina has been a conservative state, and conservative in both the good and the bad senses politically, but clearly a more conservative state. But there has been a growing influx of people into South Carolina, particularly the greater Charleston area, mostly because of job opportunities or other related attractiveness, from northern states, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Ohio, Michigan. And if you talk to the more native South Carolinians who view themselves, again, in both the good and the bad sense, as conservative. They're upset about this. Those northern liberals, those lefties, are showing up, and why doesn't why doesn't Trump put up a wall between North and South Carolina and make Massachusetts pay for it? And but the thing is that this is inevitably happens. I mean, within the United States, there are clusters of different parts of the country where many of the voters hold political views different than their fellow national citizens in other regions of the country. And as people move about, these patterns change. But that's part of life as well. And the only avenue then, if we're not to put up little walls between the state lines, is the method of reason, persuasion, argument. Often when I've met these people from the Northeast or the Midwest who are politically more to the left than traditional conservative South Carolinians or a libertarian as myself, I say, why did you move? Oh, the taxes were property taxes were a killer in New Jersey and New York, and and I had a business and the regulations were terrible. Now they're down here and they're talking about, oh, government needs to do more of this and more of that. And I try to reason with them. I said, well, you do realize that if you bring your ideas of an enlarged or paternalistically enlightened government down to South Carolina, as you now can have a right to vote as a resident, that will mean the implementation of more and higher taxes of the very types that you wanted to come down here to escape from. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And maybe you need to rethink what it is government should do or how social problems can be solved without bringing it into the orbit of politics and the fiscal burdens that will inescapably require as well. And that's how you reason with people, because otherwise then to say that you build a wall and dig a moat around every little community which you somehow aligned yourself with neighbors who in some narrow and secular sense think and act just like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, is that, with freedom comes change. And I think that's what people are rebelling against, is the notion of change. Well, life is change. And so what they try to do is to say, well, I don't like life. I don't like the change that comes with life. I want stability. I want security. And that's when they start trading. That's that famous saying that throughout history, people have traded liberty for security, or the pretense of security. They think, well, if I can just get this wall up, I'll be secure from all these illegals coming in. Or, that's how they've got this immigration police state in the Southwest. They've got highway checkpoints. They made it illegal to hire illegal aliens. They have warrantless searches of farms and ranches. Now they're boarding Greyhound buses in Florida and elsewhere around the United States. The Immigration Service claims control over 100 miles away from the border, which is like 2/3 of the population. And then you've got roving border patrol checkpoints where they just stop cars. They're seizing people's cell phones at the border and forcing them to give up passwords. They subject people to full body searches. They make them take all their clothes off so they can check their body cavities. I mean, this is what a police state looks like. And why is it that people support this? Because they've got this sense that if I'll just let the government do these things, I'll have security against change. Well, it doesn't work. I mean, we can see that the immigration control system, despite this massive police state, is still in total chaos. And so you end up losing your liberty, and you end up without any security at all. And I think what we need to recognize is that with liberty comes with change. I mean, yeah, people might move into your neighborhood. If you don't like it, go out and find some subdivision that consists of the people you like. But this is the process of change. And that's how we ended up with a country with diverse cultures. There's this notion that we got to keep the illegals out because they're going to change our culture. Excuse me, but our culture has always been one of liberty. That's our heritage. That's how you end up with New Orleans, Louisiana, the French Quarter, or you end up with Chinatown in New York, or Little Italy, or San Francisco, or San Diego, or my hometown of Laredo, whose culture is totally different. Border town culture is totally different. You end up with a society with a diverse culture. Now, some people might say, "Oh, well, Jacob, I'll wait and see if you let these people in the caravan into your house." Nobody is saying that these poor people have to be let into your house. I mean, nobody's saying that. Well, in fact, you have a right to exclude anybody in your house. What you don't have a right to do is prevent me from inviting people into my house or my business. It's my money, it's my business, it's my home. That's what I have a right to do. I have a right to associate with whomever I want. You don't have to, but you can't stop me from doing that. And that's the whole idea behind immigration controls. It's a violation of people's rights because somebody doesn't want me associating with somebody they don't like. Well, nobody's forcing them to associate with them, Richard.
Well, you see, the thing is, there's also, the illogic of what even Trump is suggesting. He says that the 5,200 regular military personnel will be joining the border guards and patrols to rebolster and assist them in holding off the invasion of these foreigners. But the fact is, how do they even do that? If they try to cross the border points legally, and they say that they want political asylum, and they're now on the American side of that bridge, as I understand the law, they can't be just turned around and told to march back to the other side of the bridge. They now have a legal right to a hearing to determine their status or not. And because of the limitedness of the holding facilities, they may be just told to show up like on bail at some point in the future when they're contacted. Or what about the people who try to cross the river illegally? The same thing applies. You as a lawyer, perhaps you know the details of this more than I do. But once they've crossed the Rio Grande and they've stepped on American soil, they can make that appeal themselves as well, even as an illegal at that point. So other than American border guards or the actual military somehow wading in and being at the midpoint of the river, the actual border between the two countries, and using rifle butts to prevent any one of these people from putting 1 foot across the line in the river to the American side, how do you even stop this? Unless you're going to shoot them, which of course is not going to be done. That would be a scandal of the century. I mean, how do you even stop this? It's all show. It doesn't mean anything.
Oh, you're absolutely right. But in fact, I read this morning where U.S. agents are meeting people at the bridge or crossing points and not letting them into the United States to claim refugee status. I mean, it is an absolute violation of law. I mean, the refugee status is built into American law, and these are federal agents that are stopping people from entering the United States to claim that refugee status. Absolute violation of the law. But you're absolutely right. I mean, these troops, it's all show. I mean, it's all show because Trump knows that he can galvanize support for the midterm elections. Because as you point out, well, for one thing, troops are not allowed to, under U.S. law, to enforce criminal law here in the United States. So what's he got them there for? Well, supposedly in support of the immigration officials. Well, what does that mean? They're going to cook their food for them? They're going to do their laundry for them? I mean, and as you point out, what are they going to do? Line up the troops on the border and start shooting refugees? I mean, that's the implication, that if you're going to send troops, well-armed troops, who are trained to kill people, I mean, that's their job, to go into war and kill people. Seems to me that that's the implication, that if you start crossing our border, we're going to start shooting and killing you. I mean, that's a heck of a message to be sending to the world. I mean, is that really what America's supposed to be all about? I don't think so, Richard.
Well, it becomes because Trump has chosen to use that word invasion. Invasion has the traditional meaning, I think, in most people's minds, of a military enemy force that has aggressive intentions, that is violent and aggressive and harmful intentions upon the people of another country, and they're proceeding to invade your country precisely to occupy it, plunder it, annex it, enslave the residents of it. And by using this terminology, it has that warlike connotation easily created in people's minds. But all it is somebody with a whole bunch of others choosing to walk, reach an imaginary line on a political map, and proceed to walk over it. And then say, I would prefer to live and work and spend some time on this side of the imaginary line as opposed to where I've just come from. That's all it amounts to. But by using this terminology, you create the imagery of an enemy threatening your nation. And unless he's a total idiot, which for all of his failings and shortcomings, which I know both of us have not hesitated to bring out about the policies and ideas of Trump, unless he's an idiot, he knows the language he's using. And he's doing it precisely for political effect.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, in our FFF Daily yesterday, we linked to an article which was a video from the New York Times that profiled these people that are in this caravan. And most of them are like women with little children that say, look, we just want to get out. We've got these gang wars which arise from the drug war that the U.S. government insists on continuing to wage down there, and then the horrible economic conditions, much of which has been caused by U.S. interventionism, because the U.S. has a long history of supporting right-wing dictatorships down there with death squads and torture squads and so forth. But these are just like women and children, little kids. And this is the invasion. This is the army. Like, nobody's got any guns or anything, but they're going to come over here and steal our jobs. Well, let's address, I know we're about out of time, but let's address one popular myth here about, oh, they're coming to get on welfare. Because that's the excuse that a lot of conservatives and even some libertarians use for supporting this socialist system of immigration controls. Well, the law is that you have to be here as a legal immigrant for a few years before you can go on welfare. And I will guarantee you that there is not one illegal who's coming in here to get on welfare, because they're coming here to get rich. You don't get rich on welfare. You get rich by working and making money. And the last thing that any illegal wants to do is have any encounter with any government official. They're scared to death of getting caught and deported, because if they get deported, if they get caught a second time, it's now a felony. So nobody wants to get caught, so they do their best to avoid the cops. They do their best to avoid any government office whatsoever. So this notion that illegals are rushing up here and walking into welfare offices is ridiculous. And in fact, the good evidence of this is that the immigration raids, these violent raids, are always, without exception, on private businesses, not on welfare offices, because that's where the illegals are working, in private businesses where American employers love them because they work hard.
The other thing is that, as with other previous and earlier waves of immigrants, these people fill niches that other Americans either have moved on in terms of their education and their skills, or just don't want to do. For instance, I'm living now in South Carolina in the Greater Charlotte area. My wife and I have recently moved into a new house that was built. It's a new subdivision. And there are many new houses still being constructed from the ground up in our area. Who are the people working there? And it's been a hot summer, particularly in our part of the country. Every day in the mid to high 90s. And they're out there 6 days a week, building, constructing, lifting up, constructing these homes. And who are all of these workers? I mean, virtually to a man, they're Latin Americans. If you talk to them and ask, oh, by the way, where are you from? Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, a few from Venezuela, but mostly from Central America. And they're doing the hard, long hours, out in the heat, physically exhausting work that clearly a lot of other, quote, Native Americans don't want to do, or would only be willing to do at a higher price to make them give up their alternative opportunities, including incurring the heat and the strenuous physical work. So these houses are being constructed and are, in terms of the labor component of their cost, less than if you had to induce a non-Hispanic, that is, quote, a Anglo middle-class American, to be willing to do this kind of work. The same thing is here. I'm right now in Grand Rapids, Michigan, participating in a student seminar, which in this part of the country. and I'm staying in a hotel. I won't mention the name of the hotel, but I went down for breakfast, and the cleaning crews are on the floor I'm on, getting ready to clean up the rooms in the hotel. And you listen to them, and what are they speaking? Spanish. Why are they speaking Spanish? Because soon they're legal workers, that some of them might not be. But what are they doing here? They're earning a living better than if they had stayed in their home country and had a much lower standard of living, difficulties in raising their children, the lack of degree of safety. Because I can assure you, it's safe in Grand Rapids. You don't see gangs running around the streets randomly shooting people here. And they have filled a niche that clearly other Americans, either because of likes and dislikes or money, economic opportunities, don't want to fill. Now, I can assure you that if we could now go back, let's say, 30 years or 40 years and see, well, who's building the houses 40 years ago? Or who's doing the housekeeping work in many motels and hotels? We would find different people. Now, on the one hand, they might be from different parts of Latin America, but you see, well, we all think, well, Anglo-Americans, well, they're all Hispanic. Well, people down there know the difference about whether they're from Honduras or El Salvador or Venezuela. Culturally and historically, they view themselves as distinct. It's like talking about all Europeans. Well, talk to a Pole about an Italian. They don't view themselves as the same. And the thing is that 40 years ago, it was different groups doing this, either other parts of Latin America or other parts of the world. I know I'm sort of going on about this, but I lived for many years in New York, and left and then came back over long periods of time. And you'd go down in the subway, and there's like the little newspaper kiosks. When I was a kid, most of those were Chinese at the time, or Korean. Then they became Indian or Pakistani who were managing and owning them. And I have no idea who the majority of them now are. And that's also each wave of immigrants filling niches that they grow out of, in the sense economic opportunities, their children get a better education so they don't replace what the parents are doing. And then another immigrant group fills that niche in the division of labor, regardless of what it is. It is natural, it is dynamic, it is growing, and it's all in the pathways to a better life in America for each group that unfortunately has to often start at the bottom and work themselves up, and if not for themselves, certainly for their children and grandchildren. It is the American way. It is what has made America great as a free, vibrant, mobile, and open society.
Yeah, well, to confirm your point, I mean, you have farmers, American farmers, who are losing their crops because they can't get the workers. And not one, from what I can tell, not one advocate of immigration controls, any Republican, any conservative, any Democrat, all the people who believe in immigration controls have gone to help these farmers pick their crops. So the crops are just rotting in the fields. And it's the same. I just read an article about the crabbing industry in the Northeast, that they can't find workers to clean the crabs and so forth when they traditionally would rely on immigrants. And so the crabbing industry is now going under. Now, I had the same experience that you did recently. I was at a Mexican restaurant, and I was going to the men's room, and there was a woman there, probably about 50-ish, and I could tell she was Hispanic, cleaning the bathroom. And so I just engaged her in a little conversation in Spanish. I said, ¿Cómo está, señora? ¿Cómo está su vida? How's your life? And she says, oh, fine. And that she couldn't speak a word of English, which was fascinating. She said she had been here a couple of years, which is really fascinating, that she hadn't learned English. And so she says to me in a very genuine voice in Spanish, sir, can you please tell me how I can learn English? I really want to learn English. And so we talked about that, and I said, well, I'm trying to improve my Spanish at the same time. So we had a really nice visit. But throughout this, I'm thinking, how many Americans want to be cleaning this bathroom at this restaurant? I don't think very many. But she's willing to do it, and that's the division of labor. This is what Americans don't realize, that when you bring low-cost labor in, they're benefiting, as you point out, because back home, things are so horrible that they're willing to accept a minimal wage for what is really pretty horrible work. and then that frees up Americans to go out and find in the Division of Labor higher paying jobs commensurate with their education and their background and so forth. So the free market harmonizes everything. So what we really need to do is focus on getting rid of the wrongdoing, get rid of the immigration controls, the welfare, the drug war, and all these things that cause crisis and chaos, and harmonize and bring the free market, which includes open borders, that harmonizes people's interests and brings a sense of morality and religious beliefs and so forth. All right, Richard, I think we're out of town. I apologize to our viewers for my allergy attack. I'm very apologetic for that. There's just when it hits, there's nothing I can do about it. But thank you for tuning in. And Richard, enjoyed the visit, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
I look forward to it, and I'm sure it was foreign pollen that was affecting you, not domestic pollen.
I get it.
Take care.